If you're just coming in, if you could grab a seat, that would be great. It's 6:05, and Rob has come from the north and has a long drive, so we want to respect his time. So thank you for having a seat and not talking so we can get started. Oh, talking to you over in the corner by the snacks. Thank you. If you could all sit down, that would be awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. My name's Erica Walsh. I live in Newfane. Myself and a few other people put the money together to put this on, to pay for Brattleboro Community Television, to do the filming and set up the Zoom, to rent the firehouse. Many people have volunteered to make food and coffee, which you're very welcome to have. And we're very happy to have Rob Roper here. Some of you might have seen the article that I had in the Commons about Act 18, the so-called Affordable Heat Act. And Rob has also been writing extensively about it for many, many years. And I've been reading what he has written, which inspired me to write something for our newspaper. Rob is a freelance writer with 20 years of experience in Vermont politics, including 3 years service as chair of the Vermont Republican Party and 9 years as president of the Ethan Allen Institute, Vermont's free market think tank. Currently, he's the author of Behind the Lines, Rob Roper on Vermont Politics, a twice-weekly column on Substack, which is a website, covering the stories the traditional Montpelier press corps chooses to ignore and pulling back the curtain on what really goes on under the Golden Dome. You can often read his articles on VermontDailyChronicle.com. And Rob is donating his time to be here. He isn't charging us anything. But if you enjoy what he has to say and you want to support him and you want to read more of what he has written, you can subscribe to his website, which is robroper.substack.com. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming out on a very gorgeous, gorgeous day that probably all wish you were someplace else, but I appreciate you being here. I love Newfane. When my wife and I were first married, we weren't living in Vermont yet, but we'd come up and visit relatives in the Jamaica area and the Manchester area. We would drive through Newfane on 30 on the way up here, and there was a store right in the corner. The building's still there. I got a little nostalgic hit when I drove by today, but it used to have this sign up in the window that said quilts and fudge. And we used to spend the next half hour of the drive kidding each other about which one of us was going to make the fudge and which one of us was going to make the quilts. When we finally got our wish and were able to move to Vermont. And little did I know, after looking at the economy, that pretty much is what the jobs up here are, making quilts and fudge. And we need to do something about that. We need to make it a little bit better for the economy. Now, this bill that you've asked me to come down and talk about tonight, the Clean Heat Standard, Act 18 S5, also known as the Affordable Heat Act by the people who are trying to sell you a bill of goods, the Unaffordable Heat Act for those of us who have followed it closely and know what it really is. There's a lot of misinformation and disinformation and propaganda surrounding it, so hopefully we can cut through some of that for the next 20 or so slides, but they go by quickly. And then we'll open it up to questions, and I'll do my best to answer anything that you have to say. So starting, you got to go back a chapter before we get into the Clean Heat Act and talk a little bit about the Global Warming Solutions Act of 2020. Now, what the Global Warming Solutions Act of 2020 did is it put in place all these mandates for lowering the state's greenhouse gas emissions footprint between now and 2050. And the goals that are put in place, this is on the first slide, if you can advance the slide so they can see as well. It's 26% greenhouse gas emissions below 2005 levels by 2025, which is just a couple months from now, 40% below 1990 levels by 2030, and 80% below those 1990 levels by 2050. And they passed those mandates, and there is also a codicil in the law that says if we don't meet them, anybody, any human on the planet can sue the state and have the state, if they win their suit, pay their legal fees for them. So not only are we as taxpayers going to have to pay to defend these suits, we are also going to more than likely have the privilege of paying to be sued. Right? Again, anyone. They give standing, Greta Thunberg can come over here in her catamaran, landed on Lake Champlain, and say, I want to sue you because you didn't meet these goals. And the goals are impossible. And I'll talk about this a little bit at the end, but the Conservation Laws Foundation just filed their first lawsuit against the state in connection with the Global Warming Solutions Act. When they passed the Global Warming Solutions Act, they had absolutely no idea what it would cost. They had very little idea of what it would require us to do in terms of how, what are we going to pay, what sort of lifestyle changes are we going to have to make, and they handed it off to a group called the Vermont Climate Council, 23 unelected people. I say 23, it's really 22 because our corrupt Speaker of the House has not appointed a legally required appointee from the Vermont Fuel Dealers Association in over 2 years. So anyway, they just passed this thing. Said, we're going to meet these mandates. We don't know how we're going to do it. So the clean heat standard is not a sort of standalone concept. It is one pillar of the Global Warming Solutions Act that has to do with heating our homes and businesses, space heating. So to keep this air in this room warm, the cooking that you do with a gas stove, the water heating, all of that stuff is falls under the thermal sector and the clean heat standard. There have to be other programs, and I'll talk about this a little bit more at the end too, that we're going to have to implement for the transportation sector. Driving, those are the big ones. How we heat our homes, how we get from point A to point B. And agriculture is another big one that it has to be dealt with. So when I'm giving you these numbers about what we have to do, remember this is like a third of what's required. And it's all on the same timeline. It's all on 2025, 2030, 2050 that we need to do all this stuff. So the Clean Heat Standard says it is the intent of the General Assembly that the Clean Heat Standard be designed and implemented in a manner that achieves Vermont's thermal sector greenhouse gas emission reductions necessary to meet the requirements of 10 VSA 5.0. That's the Global Warming Solutions Act. So we have to do this or something comparable to it by law. Now, if you can see this next slide, is it the next slide or it might be two slides? It's the one that has, yeah, that's the one with all the little houses. So the Vermont Climate Council goes to work on their climate action plan, dealing with all these sectors. But for heating, they come up with a plan that says, okay, if we're going to meet these goals, what do we as Vermonters have to do? We have to install, by 2025, a couple of months from now, 69,000 weatherization projects throughout the state to weatherize a home. We have to install 96,224 cold climate heat pumps. We have to install 63,000 heat pump hot water heaters. We have to have 12,000, almost 13,000 homes fit out with advanced wood heat, the advanced pellet systems. And we need to switch 12,112 homes to biofuels, to greenhouse gas friendly biofuels. That's by 2025. It ain't happening. It is not even close. We do not have the labor force in the state to do it. In fact, the Energy Action Network, which is an activist organization very much in favor of these climate goals, did a study and they came up with the number that there are about 700 workers in the state who are qualified and licensed to install cold climate heat pumps, do a lot of the work that I just described right here. We need 6,000 of them by 2025 in order to meet these goals. Just labor force to do the physical work. They're not coming here. They're not coming. So that's what's involved. What we have to do. It costs a lot of money to do all this, of course. Where's that money going to come from? We'll get to it. One big piece of disinformation that you're going to hear from the proponents of this plan is that the Clean Heat Standard is not a tax. It is a tax. What they're trying to say is that we've got these clean heat credits. it's a credit system, it's not a tax, it's incentivizing fuel dealers to change their business models, and they give you all this stuff. But it is a tax. And Senator Dick McCormick, he's not from this county, he's from Windsor County. Bless his heart. He is an activist. He is very much in favor of this, but he's sitting in the committee. I was watching, scratching his head, trying to figure this thing out. And he admitted to his fellow committee people on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee in the Senate, he says, I don't understand how this works. And he said, I think what this really is, it's a Rube Goldberg. And why don't we just pass a carbon tax? And the chairman of the committee, Chris Bray, just about had a heart attack when the words carbon tax actually came out of one of his committee members' mouths. But bless his heart, he was exactly right. That's what this is. This is a Rube Goldberg carbon tax, because they don't want to have to go out there and campaign going into 2024, having said that they passed a $17 billion carbon tax on home heating fuel. They want to be able to say, oh, we planted the clean heat standard. It sounds so nice. But what this actually does, and what the Rube Goldberg thing is it requires Vermont fuel dealers to go out there, anybody who imports fuel into the state. What they wanted to do is they wanted to hit the wholesalers. But the problem is that most of the wholesalers that sell into Vermont aren't in Vermont. They're in Albany, they're in somewhere in Massachusetts, they're in Canada, and it's a violation of the Interstate Commerce Clause for them to try to tax them or regulate them. So what they had to do is say anybody who brings fuel into the state, imports it, crosses the border with it, and whoever owns it at that point has to buy these carbon credits. And that could be a big company, that could be AmeriGas, or that could be, Joe's Propane, who buys one truck full and comes across from New Hampshire and sells it to a small community of people. So it's incredibly complicated. But they have to buy these carbon taxes. They don't actually look like that. That was just me with one morning playing around on Photoshop where I had something to do. And the carbon credit is essentially, it's a de facto excise tax. Now, the way an excise tax works is we have one on gasoline. For the state of Vermont, it's like a 33% excise tax. I think it's like 17 or 18 cents for the federal excise tax on gasoline. Who pays that? We do. And what they're trying to say with the carbon tax is, the fuel dealers aren't going to pass that cost along. They're going to eat that cost, and you're not going to. They would never do that. They would never try. And then, of course, the fuel dealers say if we didn't pass it along, we'd go out of business. So, of course, they're going to pass it along. So it really operates as a de facto excise tax. They have to buy the credit. They are, in effect, paying a tax. The tax is going to support government programs, just like any other tax would. But instead of having the revenue go through the Treasury, like a normal tax would, they're creating these things called default, or a thing, or possibly multiple things called default delivery agents, which is going to be Efficiency Vermont. And so what it means is the money, they will be in charge of selling the credits, and the credit money will go to Efficiency Vermont, or whoever else turns out to be another default delivery agent, will run the program in lieu of a government office actually doing it. They'll be overseen by the Public Utilities Commission, they'll be overseen by the Agency of Natural Resources. But that's how they launder the money so they can go out on the campaign trail and say, we didn't pass a tax. It is a Rube Goldberg carbon tax. It is an excise tax on home heating fuel. We already have an excise tax on home heating fuel in Vermont. It's 2 cents per gallon, and it raises about $5 million a year. And that $5 million a year goes to subsidize weatherization projects. You have low-income people who are living in homes that aren't well insulated. We subsidize insulating their homes for them, and we raise about $5 million with a 2 cent per gallon excise tax on fuel. So, how much? I'm going to go back to this again. By 2030, we have to weatherize 120,000 homes. 177,107 heat pumps installed, 136,000 558 heat pump hot water heaters installed, 14,992 homes with advanced wood heat installed, and we have to switch 21,000 homes over to biofuel. How far do you think $5 million goes to meet that tab? Not very far. That's for that's 2 cents. That is 2 cents per gallon. So, what happened was after they they passed the Clean Heat Standard Law, just like they passed the Global Warming Solutions Act, not knowing what it would cost. In fact, they ran a very aggressive campaign not to let anybody know what this thing is going to cost, what impact it would have on the economy, what impact it would have on home heat fuel prices, and what impact it would have on you trying to survive the winter. Julie Moore, who is the secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources, actually said, this is ridiculous, we have to have some idea what this is going to cost. And she did what she called the back of the napkin calculation, looking at what it would cost for the first 5 years of the program, 2026 to 2030. If we're just going to meet that first thing of goals, how much money is it going to cost us to do this? And she worked it out that it was going to be about a total of $2 billion that we would have to spend as a state. Some of that would be government, some of that our government, existing funds. Some of it would be federal funds coming in through the Inflation Reduction Act. Some of it would be just people who want to have a heat pump and they're going to pay for it out of their own pocket, or weatherize their home and they're going to pay for it out of their pocket. But when all was said and done, and all that money is sort of removed from that $2 billion equation, what was left over was 70 cents a gallon. It was going to be a 70 cent per gallon impact on every gallon of home heating fuel that we buy. Well, I told you Christopher Bray freaked out when the word carbon tax came up in his committee. Well, he really did not like hearing the agency that is going to be in charge of implementing this program, the head of that agency, saying it's going to cost 70 cents a gallon. And they pulled out the stops, they called Vermont Digger, they called all the news outlets and said, you got to put the kibosh on this 70 cent number. And they trashed it. The media trashed it, said it's back of the napkin, it's wrong, it's a scare tactic. Well, folks, it turned out to be low. It turned out to be low. What we did get is a study through the Agency of Natural Resources and the Department of Public Services, the two agencies that are going to be charged with sort of overseeing this to the extent that our government will. And they've spent the last, I think it's 8 months looking at the program, and they came up with the total cost to implement this between 2026 and 2050 is $17.3 billion for our little state. Our entire state budget, which is extremely bloated right now, is $8.6 billion a year. So yeah, that's over 17 years. But the big part, if you look at the chart that's up here on the wall, it's that first, just up to see where that first peak is on the front and down the other side by just a little bit. That's the first 5 years of the program. That's 2026 through the end of 2030, January 31st, 2030. And where Julie Moore had calculated $2 billion is what the total cost was going to be. That's over $7 billion. That's over $7 billion that we as a state are going to have to come up with in order to meet this goal. And when they won't come out with an actual impact number for the fuel yet. This is a draft report. I will emphasize this is a draft report. And they say we're not ready to put an exact number on it, but if you just multiply 3.2 or whatever it is times what 2 billion was to get to 7.25 or so, it comes out to about $3.20 a gallon on top of what you're currently paying for your home heating fuel. The fuel dealers put it at $3.20 a gallon, and somebody else did an analysis of it that said it was going to be something closer to $5 a gallon. The Ethan Allen Institute that I used to work for, they did this study after I left. They came up with $4 a gallon at the time, and they were laughed out of the building, but it turns out they were They were pretty spot on with it. So $17 billion is the number that's out there right now. And as I said, it is a draft, and they're probably going to come back, and they're probably going to say it's not going to cost quite as much as that. But do you really think they're off by a factor of 2, or a factor of 5, or a factor of 10? I don't. It's going to be a heck of a lot of money. And there's a couple things about this number that I think are really important that have not been addressed by anyone in the committees that are looking after this, and that is the fact that there are some pieces missing from this. And one of the big pieces that's missing from this is the administrative costs to run the freaking program. Now, a carbon credit is based on how much greenhouse gas emissions, whatever the act of installing a heat pump or weatherizing that space, takes out of the atmosphere. So somebody has to verify 120,000 that 120,000 heat pump installations took place, where they took place, what the circumstances, because if you put a heat pump into a building that's not weatherized, it's not taking greenhouse gas emissions out of the atmosphere to the same level that if you put it in a place that is weatherized. If you put it in a little room versus a big room. All of these factors need to be calculated to some degree to have an accurate count on how much greenhouse gas. Think about that. Think about how many bureaucrats it is going to take to actually verify that all of these things take place. It is going to be wickedly expensive to pay for that bureaucracy. Now, that's just the bureaucracy. The other part of it is you've got this clean heat credit market. All right, you install a heat pump. Who owns it? They are still arguing about this. But, I mean, from my perspective, and I think a lot of it is falling this way, is whoever pays for the program when it's installed gets to keep the credit. So you're the homeowner. You go out and you say, I want a heat pump, and I want to weatherize this room while I'm doing it. And they come in and they do that work for you, and you say, okay, the bureaucrat comes in and says that's worth X number of credits, and those credits are worth X number of dollars. You own the credit. All right, what do I do with this credit? Well, you got to sell it to somebody who is an obligated party, one of the people bringing the fuel across the border. I told you this is crazy complicated. Rube Goldberg, Dick McCormick, bless your heart. You can't just sell these things because any kind of carbon exchange is governed and monitored by the Security and Exchange Commission, and they're not screwing around. So the value of this thing has to be calculated in such a way that it's verifiable. And then you have to have an exchange, like a bank, like you're selling a stock or a bond, where this thing is placed and ownership can be tracked and transferred. So, okay, you're the homeowner, you own the credit, you sell the credit to the fuel dealer down the street, he buys it from you, and then somebody has to track the fact that that fuel dealer owns it, and it is now credited against their obligation for however many credits they're supposed to buy. And then this thing, because your heat pump lasts 15 years, it has a credit life of 15 years that then needs to be retired at the end of 15 years. The IT costs, they just redid our IT a couple years ago for the Department of Motor Vehicles. I think it was like a $50 million price tag to do it. That's going to be nothing compared to what they have to do in order just to run this thing. So that $17 billion doesn't account for that, which is a huge, it doesn't account for the bureaucracy, doesn't account for the IT to run the program. Maybe they'll find somebody to farm out that program too, but they haven't found one yet. And remember, they have to do it. It's the law, or we can be sued by anybody. The other big number that does not appear in the $17 billion one, and this is an important one, is when they passed this bill, they realized, okay, who is going to get really hurt as we transition away from heating our homes with fossil fuels to electricity? Poor people. Because low-income people it's going to be very difficult for somebody. I mean, if you live in a mobile home, you cannot transition to a heat pump because from what I'm not a technical person, but from what I understand from the testimony I heard, it is a fire hazard. You can't put a heat pump in a mobile home. They have to heat with some sort of fossil fuel, usually kerosene, because it has to be an above ground tank, and kerosene is the most expensive of all of the fossil fuels. So you put a $3.20 tax on the fuel that low-income people are going to have to do. You have to have a social safety net program for them. You have to. We have low-income heating assistance program right now called LIHEAP. I don't think that they're just going to let people freeze to death. So that there has to be some sort of a program to help people deal with these costs when they're in no position to be able to deal with these costs. The cost of that program is not reflected in that $17 billion. So that, and it has to be built in, or people are not going to live. So these numbers are low, and it's a totally impractical program. Oh, and there are some of the numbers that I was just going through. Got ahead of myself. Pennies a gallon. So that's basically where we are. That's sort of what the clean heat standard is in a nutshell. Before I get to the end about what we can do about it and next steps, I do want to just talk about a couple of the ways they've been saying it's only going to cost pennies and how it doesn't work. This is some of the propaganda that you're going to hear about this. And your representatives, your senators from down in this part of the woods are going to come out and say, look, it's not going to cost $3 a gallon. It's not going to cost 70 cents a gallon. It's only going to cost a nickel a gallon. Well, we looked at that. Okay, it's a nickel. How much do we raise from the excise tax on home heating fuel? $5 million. So you're going to raise it, you're going to get $11 million. $11 million is going to cover $17 billion worth of stuff you need to do. So there's your gut check math. It's not going to work. But what they point to is a program in Oregon that is not really an apples to apples comparison. It's apples to oranges because it's on fuel, gasoline and diesel, transportation fuels, not on home heating fuels. But they have a program there that's the Oregon Fuel Standard. And they say, well, that raises $50 million a year in Oregon, and it only costs 7 cents a gallon for the tax. So we could do that. But what you got to understand, and why this is such a disingenuous comparison, but it's the one that they're resting their math on, is Oregon has 6.6 times the number of people in Vermont. So they're raising $50 million from 6.5 times the number of people. So what happens if you take that 10 cents and you expand it by 6.7? You're starting to get into that 70 cent per gallon range. And to raise, I got the wrong number there, but it would require a $1.20 tax. And again, as I said, it doesn't account for the cost of the bureaucracy. Another thing that is important to know, if they say that it's not going to cost you much, Representative Jim Harrison of Chittenden put in an amendment when they were passing the clean heat standard and said, okay, if you're so confident it's only going to cost 7 cents or maybe 10 cents at most, let's put an amendment in the bill that says if it gets up to 20 cents, if the impact reaches 20 cents a gallon, that there's a kill switch, that it can't charge you any more than that. The Democrats shot it down 101 to 43. So they know that this is going to cost more than 20 cents a gallon. I'm not sure they knew it was going to cost. I think they believed it wasn't going to cost $3 a gallon, but that's where it is. Getting back to some of the stuff about the poor too, and low-income Vermonters. If you follow my column recently, I've been pulling some video from some of the equity groups that are looking into the way that the Public Utilities Commission has 2 groups that are assisting it, a technical advisory group and an equity advisory group. I mean, it's a 3-ring circus. But the equity folks are supposed to make sure that this is going to be done fairly. And they're coming to the conclusion that it can't be done, that it cannot be done fairly. They had the director of the LIHEAP program from come in, the Vermont director of LIHEAP come in and explain that apart from raising the prices on everybody, it's going to cut the assistance to the average LIHEAP recipient by about $500 a year. Because the way the program works is they have to buy the fuel. And they get a fixed amount of money from the federal government for LIHEAP. And he said, if you're going to raise the price of the fuel, it's going to cost that. And he was going on 70 cents a gallon. He said, if the cost really comes in at 70 cents a gallon, that means it's going to be so many fewer gallons that we can give people. And if we're giving them $500 less in fuel, they're going to have to come up with that money themselves in order to do it. It was actually quite funny. There was a person who was hired by the Public Utilities Commission to do public outreach. I should take a picture of this because they got 2 people in 2 meetings to show up to their public outreach, and I got, what, 50 in here now? They ought to hire me. I'll do it for much less than the $20,000 a year that they pay these people to get 2 people into a Zoom meeting. But because nobody showed up, and the 2 people who did show up didn't want to talk, they said, well, eat some time, person who has been hired to run this meeting, and tell us a little bit about your story. And they live just down the road here in Brattleboro. And this person was saying, I rent, and my landlord is going to pay to put this stuff in. So if he's forced to put this stuff in, he's going to raise my rent. And I don't want my rent raised. And if you rip out the heating system and replace it with all these things you have to cut holes in the wall to put the heating system, I got to move out while they're doing the work for, say a month. Where am I going to go? We got a housing shortage. This is insane. I mean, this is the person that they're paying to sell the program, and even that person knows it's insane. And it really is. It's going to hammer everybody, but low-income people really are going to be hit hard. The last thing, I brought up the labor issue before, and there are provisions in the law that say you have to do these clean heat measures, the installations, the weatherizations, for 16% of all the ones that are done in a given year have to happen in low-income housing or low-income households, and another 16% has to happen in either low-income or middle-income households. And all that has to be paid for with subsidies. That's another one of the things that the Office of Racial Equity came in, and when they were passing the clean heat standard, and said, look, people can't afford it. They cited numbers saying that the low-income people in Vermont, and I think across the country, can't afford a $400 emergency expense, which is pretty alarming. People are strapped for cash. So he says, all right, if they can't afford a $400 expense for an emergency, how do you expect them to pay even 10% of a $15,000 home weatherization and home heat pump installation? They can't pay even 10% of that if you mandate that. They can't even come close to paying 10% of that. So if you're going to do these programs, you have to pay 100%, subsidize 100% of the jobs for low-income people. So that means it's just going to raise the price on everybody else who's not paying even higher, but they have to apply for that. So while the low-income folks are applying to get these subsidies and get their stuff done, the people who can afford just to do it, they're going to line up the work and say, okay, all right, I'm a low-income person. I want to have my home heating system done. I don't want the oil anymore. I don't want to pay the penalty. I want to do the right thing by the environment. Great, you're in line. And 3 years from now, you just might get your home heating. In fact, Senator, my old senator, I got redistricted out of Lamoille County Senate District. I'm in Washington County Senate District now. But my old senator, Richie Westman, had testified. He was in one of the money committees on this bill. He said, I bought a pellet heater for my farmhouse, and it's been sitting in my front yard for 3 years because I can't get anybody to install it. He's a senator. Right? I mean, he's got some pull. So that's what's going to happen. And if you can't make that transition, if you're a low-income Vermonter and you can't make that transition for whatever reason, you are stuck paying the higher and higher fuel bill. And it's designed to go higher and higher every year because the more people wean off of it, the costs are borne by fewer and fewer people on those gallons. It's a really, really bad idea. talked about that. Talked about that. I got way ahead of myself here. So now we get into what can we do? What is the future of the program? Well, there's a thing in the bill that they like to call the check back provision. And what the check back provision is, and this is how they got it to override the veto, they put this in and said, all right, usually what happens when the legislature passes a law that requires rulemaking, the agency goes back, writes the rules, and then they bring it to a committee called LCAR, which is Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules. And LCAR, which is made up of 8, I think, legislators. I think it's 4 senators and 4 House members. Yeah, that's right. They'll either approve the rules or disapprove the rules, and that's that. You don't hear about it very much. That's how they banned internal combustion engine vehicles after 2035. LCAR did it. They didn't have to vote on it, just LCAR. That's another story for another time. But what they did with this check back is they said, okay, well, this is such a big deal. When the rules come back from the Public Utilities Commission, we all have to vote on it. Not just LCAR, we, the whole legislature, and it will be treated as a bill, not a rule. And the House will have to pass it, the Senate will have to pass it. Then it goes to the governor. The governor has the right to veto it if he doesn't like it, and a veto override. And if that happens, then the rules don't go into effect, then this thing doesn't go into effect. So what I would encourage all of you to do between now and November is every candidate that is on the ballot, you ask them, what are you going to do with the Act 18 rule bill that will come before you in January 2025? And if they say, I don't know, don't vote for them. The only people you vote for is the ones that say, I will vote no on that bill. Absolutely not. And if they say, well, I don't know because we don't know how much it's going to really cost yet, we're still waiting for those figures to come in and say, what's your threshold? There was a 20-cent threshold, that went down. What's your threshold? If this is going to add 10 cents a gallon to home heating fuel, you're going to vote for it? 20 cents? 50 cents? What's your threshold? Make them give you a number, and it should be 0. So that's the first thing that I think that needs to happen is we do need to win that vote. And the only way to win that vote is to change the people who went down there and voted it in the first place. The second thing is the clean heat standard itself needs to be repealed. And one of the pieces of disinformation you're getting is, oh, well, you know, the law doesn't really exist until we vote on it again. And that's not true. The rules won't go into effect if they vote not to bring the rules into effect. But the law still exists. The law is on the books. Act 18. We will have the mandate for a clean heat standard until that is repealed. So that's step 2. Repeal the Clean Heat Standard. And the other thing that we got to do is repeal the Global Warming Solutions Act. Or at the very least, repeal that provision that says we can be sued by anybody if we don't meet these mandates. Because that's what's driving all of this. That is what's driving the whole shebang, is the Global Warming Solutions Act. And they'll come, oh, well, we've got to meet these mandates. Well, no, you don't. Just change the law. Don't let them sue us. And that's what we can do. Those are the 3 steps. Make sure that we elect people who are going to not put these rules into effect. Don't let them drive up the cost. Repeal the Clean Heat Standard. Repeal the Global Warming Solutions Act in its entirety would make the most sense. But even if you can't, if that's a bridge too far for some people, then at least repeal the part of the law that allows anybody to sue us. I will point out that this has all of this, even if we did it, even if we found the labor force, even if we found the money, even if we could afford it, and even if all the mobile homes were technologically feasible of doing this work, it would have absolutely 0 impact on global warming and climate change, which is the real kicker in all of this. And my last point before I open it up to questions is that this is, as I said at the beginning, only one of a pillar, several pillars of programs under the Global Warming Solutions Act. This has to do with home heating. There will be a transportation standard that as much as $1 a gallon for gasoline, and they have to do something in agriculture, which I haven't even heard of what they had no suggestions as to how they're actually going to do that yet, but it's going to cost a lot of money. So that is that's the clean heat standard in a nutshell. The Rube Goldberg carbon tax. I hope I was able to un-Rube Goldberg it a little for you tonight. Any questions?
Yeah. When I was talking to one of the ones that represent us, he was basically telling us that he didn't want us using wood. Now, and then I see you had on there, basically they want you to go to some wood, which is true.
Well, it's
We couldn't hear the question back here. We can't hear that.
oh, you can't, the question was, what's the status of wood? Burning wood. Well, it's a complicated one. They want you to use advanced wood heat, which is one of those advanced pellet stoves. That's what they mean by
I'm talking
wood.
about regular firewood.
Yeah, and again, this is, you gotta be really careful because they're slippery and they'll say, oh yeah, wood's fine. What they're talking about is advanced wood
Because he
heat.
told
What you're
me-
talking about, they do not, they don't want you using regular,
That's what he told me,
regular
yes.
cordwood.
Yes.
Right now, I haven't seen anything in the law that says you can't use cordwood. It's sort of, too many people use it as a backup heat, too many people use it so that it's politically sensitive. But we'll see what happens when the rules come back. Because that's where they're gonna get you. I mean, they just passed this law, so we gotta meet the mandates. ANR and Public Utilities Commissions have to come up with the rules. I suspect that one of the rules that they're gonna come up with is some sort of curb on the use of cordwood. But we'll see. That's just speculation right now on my part. What was the other hand? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Pam Baker from Halifax. So my question is, so we can repeal some of these, the act and the global,
Global Warming Solutions
thank
Act.
you. So if we just allow our legislators to do that for us, they will not, we already know this.
Well, the ones that are there will not.
So instead of trying to get them out, how can we get the vote down to our level? I mean, we voted for a constitutional change, sadly, about sexual reproduction in the state that we decided as you know, citizens of the state. How do we get that down to us? Is that possible?
The only thing I can tell you about getting it down to you is you've got to vote for the candidates locally. Because I mean, even if you said that did come to a referendum on Article 22, but before it became a referendum that you and we got to vote on, it had to go through the legislature twice. So it really, at the local level, you have to find candidates to run for office and you have to get them elected. And if you fail to get somebody elected, then you really have to put the pressure on the ones that are there and get them to do the right thing, which can be done. I mean, it can be done. All the way back and then.
Do you have any idea between transportation, agriculture, and the weatherization and whatever of the homes, how much money that would impact, say, a regular family of four?
Let me do this, some math in my head. What the Vermont Fuel Dealers Association, if I'm remembering the number correctly, I think it was, they said if it was they were going with the 70 cent per gallon, that it would be about $700 a year, or $750 a year per household, in addition to your fuel bill for the average household. $1 a gallon, I think the average car drives 12,000 miles, I think, in Vermont a year. So you have to break down whatever fuel mileage you get, depends on what kind of car you get, how many gallons go into 12,000 miles a year. So it's a lot of money. I mean, it's really a lot of money. I broke one of these things down for a different tax, because they're always saying, oh, it's just $16 more per month. Oh, that's another one, the renewable energy standard, which is going to drive up the cost of electricity if you do electrify everything, you're going to be paying more for that for no reason. And that was $192. Was the $1 billion a year added to our collective electricity bill, and it's wide. If it were $1 billion, some estimates had it $450 million a year. Still a lot of money, but $192 a year. And everybody says, "Oh, that's just $16 a month." Who cares about $16 a month? Well, if you're not making a lot of money to begin with, $16 a month and $192 a year is 2 weeks worth of groceries. So you're taking 2 weeks worth of groceries out of somebody's refrigerator off their table, so you can pay Renewable Energy Vermont more money to create renewable energy. Is that fair? I don't think it is. But yes, these things add up. So $16 a month more for electricity, $700 a year more for your home heating fuel, or more. It's going to be more than that. It's $1 a gallon for gasoline. Man, I just filled up my car today to drive down here. So, you know, I put 14 gallons in my 16-gallon tank, and so would have been $14 more that I would have had to pay for that fill up.
So the best case scenario would be like 100 or 200 a month for a family.
Yeah, I think Governor Scott's team at the end of 2023 put out a calculation. I want to say it was the legislature, the supermajority under the Golden Dome passed $1,200 a year in new taxes and fees on Vermonters. You know, the Clean Heat Standard hadn't kicked in yet, but the DMV fee increases, the renewable energy standard, the payroll tax, the new payroll tax that we've got coming, or that started, it's quite a bit. It really, and you know, when you consider that inflation is already driving everything up as well, it's a perfect storm. It's a perfect economic storm that's hitting our. I think that's this gentleman's next, and then.
Yeah, my name is Gal Ross. I just moved here. So I have 3 questions. What is the ultimate goal of this property? Just this whole theme of what they're trying to accomplish? That's my first question. My second question is it just gonna be a mandate of cost that's gonna drive behavior, or penalization if you don't act? And then my third question is, can the grid support it? You know, I just put in, you know, we just moved here, we renovated our house. We have a pellet stove, we have an oil burner, but I did install heat pumps. Considering I've been keeping my house at 71 with this heat, my electric bill is more than double. If you're on a fixed income, can people sustain that? So, you know, I want to understand what the ultimate reasoning is, what's the behavior? Is it going to be mandated by price and behavior? And my last question is the grid capable? Because I just watched my electric bill more than double, and I heard that the heating part of the heat pumps are even more greater and less efficient. So, you know, those are the 3 things that come to mind.
Okay, the first question you have, what's their goal? I think it was best summed up by Senator Mark McDonald, also on that Energy and Natural Resources Committee, when the architect of the Clean Heat Standard, a guy by the name of Richard Coward, was testifying before them after an equity presentation about, you know, how are we going to really keep low-income Vermonters from taking it in the teeth with this bill. And he said, it's not really, honestly, they're not really compatible goals. You can't cushion anybody from the price pain and still meet the goals of this thing, is essentially what he said. And Senator McDonald said, we don't do things based on helping poor people. We do things based on saving the world. That's the attitude that you got to deal with up there. They have a God complex. They are global warming and environmentalism from an anthropological global warming perspective is their religion, and they're executing. That's all they're thinking about with this. Carrot and stick. Yes, it's driven by the monetary pain that you feel. Basically, if you do what we tell you to do and what we want you to do, install a heat pump, we'll pay for it. If you don't do what we want you to do, we're going to make you pay for the guy who does want to do it. That's where the $17 billion wealth transfer is going to
Will
come
there
from.
be tax credits? Will there, in addition to the purchases, will there be incentives?
Yeah, that will be that's what the $17 billion is going to pay for. Essentially, that's how much all this activity has to take, and they're going to take money based on the sale of the credits, which are mandated. The purchasing of the credits is mandated. That will raise the $17 billion, which will then be redistributed to the people who are doing the things that they want done. And can the grid handle it? I'm not an expert on the grid, but my friend Meredith Angwin, who lives not very far from here, would be a great person to have come to talk to your group. She wrote a book called Shorting the Grid, which is she is an expert on how much the grid can handle and what it can take. Based on what she's educated me, there's no way in hell our current grid can handle everything that they want to do. I mean, not just the electrification of home heating and water heating, but if they electrify the transportation sector as well, I mean, that's most of the houses in the state, from what I understand from some of the testimony of the technical people who actually install this stuff, is a lot of the homes don't have the electrical panels that are out. They have 100 amp electrical panels that you need a 200 or a 400 amp. If you're going to heat your home and your car, you need like a 400 amp electrical panel, and people don't have them. There's a supply chain issue with getting them. There's a labor issue with installing them. So I mean, it's.
And what about backup generators? If they're run off of propane to electrify your heat pumps,
Yeah.
isn't that kind of contradicting,
Yeah, but I mean, that's. I would say the market for fossil fuel-based generators is going to go up, just for safety's sake. Yes, ma'am.
Well, it's not really a question, but I'm just thinking back. I've been around for a few years, but back in the 70s, when the all-electric home was the only way to go, how successful did that turn out to be? Costs involved were horrendous. It was a disaster.
I know.
They thought it was the greatest thing since cream cheese, you know?
I remember a funny story. Just that was my first apartment after I was kicked out of the nest and on my own. My roommate and I got a place that had electric heat. We didn't know nothing from nothing, so we cranked it up. 75 in the winter. First month, we had an $890 electric bill. This was in like 1996, 1997. Like, holy. Well, we said some words I shouldn't say here, especially since we're being filmed. But
I will say that I do love my heat pump, though. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, it responds immediately, cool and heat,
Yeah, people have had good experience with heat pumps, bad experiences. In fact, my wife wanted one, and we have a little office space over our barn. So we thought, okay, we'll try a heat pump and see how it works. And it's been great this summer with the air conditioning. It works for her really well because she likes to keep the room really cool in the wintertime. She's like, 60 degrees. 60 degrees is warm. The only problem we had is we just had it burn out for a week. There was something in the electrical chip that burned out, and and when they came to fix it, they were like, well, it's going to take us at least a week and maybe a month to get the part. Luckily, it was only a week, but still, if that happens in winter and that's your primary source of...
Well, I'm sure they'll set up warming shelters.
I'll let her back in the main house. Keep her warm. Yes, sir.
Yes, sounds to me that the only entity that is going to benefit from this, if this goes through, is Green Mountain Power.
Green Mountain Power, Burlington Electric, and Efficiency Vermont. Efficiency Vermont's the big one.
I read somewhere that Green Mountain Power has quite a nest egg, and also they are hiring lobbyists.
They have not hired. They've had a lot of
I mean, it
lobbyists for a long
seems to
time.
me that this is sort of like a monopoly in the making. I mean, and I look at your cable company, they're pretty much of a monopoly. They start you out low, and within a couple of years, you're double, because you really have no other place to go. I mean, there are alternatives, but the alternatives, you know, can be very inconvenient.
Yep.
And
No,
then-
there-
and then
there's-
the other thing, I mean, it sounds like the goal is to push out the fossil fuel, providers.
Absolutely.
Okay, what the hell is gonna happen when there's a 5-day power outage?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, and that's the point that I've made. I mean, if you really believe that we are going to be experiencing more extreme weather in the future, and maybe we will. I don't know enough to say yes or no, we're not, but we've been experiencing flooding, lots more rain. Why would you ever create an energy strategy that is dependent upon weather-related power sources, wind and solar?
For a single.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're where they want to get the electric power from, is from the renewable energy. It makes absolutely no sense. You would want to have non-weather dependent, non-weather influenced base load power, and we're moving away from that. In fact, I mean, I wrote one article back when we had the eclipse in April, and we had all the people from Massachusetts and New Hampshire come to Vermont to visit us to see the eclipse from the best seats in the house. And when it was over, there was a story in the Boston Globe that they had all these people driving electric vehicles were up in St. Johnsbury. They okay, time to go home. And they went to the charging station because they had no power in their cars. And it was a 4.5-hour wait to charge their car. It took them like a day, full day to get home, hours. And what I pointed out is like, okay, well, they just had a kumbaya moment. Everybody's in a good mood. They just experienced something that's, nobody's going to see for another 76 years or whatever it is. And that's probably going to go about as well emotionally as it could go. Now imagine if that was a Canadian wildfire that was forcing everybody to leave at the same time, and not this wonderful eclipse, and you had to get out of Dodge or you were going to die. And you pull up in your electric car and say, well, it's a 4.5-hour wait until you can get out of here. And same thing if there's an ice storm in the middle of the winter and the power goes out, and your car is electric, your stove is electric, your heating is electric. You can't leave, you can't stay warm, you can't make food. You're screwed. But that's the future that they're writing for us in Montpelier today. All right, we should probably wrap it up. So, yes.
So there was Opinion Dynamics, a marketing firm that now has become an arm of the Electrify Everything world, got a contract from the legislature. The contract was awarded in April of this year to educate Vermonters about the Clean Heat Standard, Affordable Heat Act, Act 18, whatever. I haven't seen anything about it. I saw after the fact that non-attended Zoom session for feedback to the Public Utilities Commission, and I went to see when the next one was scheduled, and none are scheduled currently. So prior to, my understanding is that whatever the Climate Action Council Public Utilities Committee is proposing is going to go to the legislature in January of 2025. So if there's no way to give feedback right now to the Public Utilities Commission, is there?
Yes, you can. You can go to the Public Utilities Commission's website. There's a menu bar that says Clean Heat Standard. You can click on that and it will give you instructions on how to submit a written question or statement or general feedback. It's not the easiest site to use, but you can do it.
Do you know if there are any of those posting sessions scheduled? The last time that there were.
No, they stopped. They did. They're legally required to do 6 of them, and they've done 3. One of which has not been posted for some strange reason. I think a public outreach thing that has been kept from the public. But they were waiting until they get the final number on this so they can talk more fluidly about the actual economic impact. Okay, I'm gonna do 2 more questions and then I gotta get on the road to Stowe. Yes, ma'am?
All right, this is just a comment about heat pumps. Several years ago, I had someone come out and evaluate and give me an estimate. They came to the conclusion that there was no good spot in my home where it could efficiently heat the areas that it could possibly heat. It was about 7 years later, I had someone else come out and do the same thing, thinking, well, maybe things are a little different with the heat pumps, maybe they're, same thing. There is no place in my home where it would be efficient. And they said no.
Yeah, no, that is a problem, particularly for Vermont, because we have older homes that tend to be lots of little rooms, because you got that old New England style farmhouse, and they really work better in the open floor plan. And so, yeah, that's just another logistical issue that has come up quite a bit in testimony and seems to be ignored. Last question, who had the hand up in the back? Oh, yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Bert Wilkinson, Putney. I just want to clarify a couple of things. The bill that has been passed is S5, is that correct?
S5 was what it was until it passed, and then it became Act 18.
Okay, so Act 18 isn't the bill that's on the books to be passed? Or
No, it
that
is passed.
Is that the Global Warming Solution Act?
Global Warming Solutions Act, no, that is from 2020. That's a separate
Okay.
bill.
All right, so Act 18, it has been passed.
Act 18 was passed.
Okay, you said we should ask our legislators if they voted for this?
Yes, because what happens under Act 18 is it requires another vote on January, anytime during the next legislature, after January 2025, to turn the key on the rules, to approve the rules and turn the key on the program. So the clean heat standard is the law of the land, and that remains the law of the land until we repeal it. But there is this one provision of the law that says it doesn't get implemented until another vote by the legislature to approve the rules.
Okay, I just wanted to add, Mike.
In the meantime, though, they can sue us, right?
Yes, and they already sued us.
We have Mike Mawicki's with us tonight, our district representative. And I didn't know if he could maybe ask you to answer a couple questions. Would you, Mike? Oh, I thought you were Mike. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. No. So ask your representatives how they're going to vote.
Yep.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm fighting words, man. All right, well, thank you very much. And if you enjoyed the presentation and if you want to learn more, you can go to robertroper.substack.com. And the name of my column is Behind the Lines, Rob Roper on Vermont Politics. And I hope some of you will sign up. I know some of you already have. But thanks for having me tonight. This is great. What a great turnout. And
Thank you.